Miguel Santos had always believed that keeping to yourself was the best way to stay out of trouble. At 17, he had lived quietly in the shadows of a bustling American life, a life his parents had worked hard to build after emigrating from the Philippines more than 2 decades earlier. He was polite, soft-spoken, respectful, and observant. He didn't argue with teachers, never skipped class, and if there was one thing he never imagined being accused of, it was being a threat. That made what happened that day all the more jarring, not just for Miguel, but for everyone who watched it unfold. It began outside Liberty Plaza Mall in downtown Atlanta. The sun was high, casting sharp shadows across the pavement. The air was warm with the chatter of Saturday shoppers. Miguel had just stepped out to get some air while his younger sister Mia finished her cotton candy inside. He leaned against a pillar, scrolling his phone, smiling at a goofy meme his best friend had sent him. It was an innocent moment, pure and private, but within seconds it would become a national headline. Officer Trent Barker had a reputation. Locals knew his name. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a square jaw that looked like it had been carved from stone, Barker was the kind of man who saw the world in black and white and often treated people of color as the problem. He was patrolling the mall, sunglasses perched low on his nose, eyes scanning for trouble that didn't exist. That's when he saw Miguel and saw that smile, and for reasons rooted far deeper than anyone could see, it set him off. He stomped toward Miguel like a thundercloud descending. Miguel barely had time to look up before Barker barked, "You think this is funny, kid?" Miguel blinked, confused. "Sorry," he replied, uncertain if the man was even talking to him. "Don't play dumb," Barker snapped, his voice loud, drawing the attention of passers-by. "You smirking at me?" Miguel's smile vanished instantly. "No, sir. I was looking at my phone. Just a meme," he said softly, showing his screen as if to prove his innocence. But Barker didn't care. In a matter of seconds, the encounter escalated. Barker grabbed Miguel by the hoodie, yanking him forward. The crowd gasped. Phones rose into the air. "What are you doing? He didn't do anything!" a woman shouted from nearby. Miguel's sister Mia screamed, dropping her cotton candy and rushing out from the food court. She tried to run toward her brother, but another officer held her back. Tears welled in her eyes as Miguel was shoved against the wall, his phone crashing to the ground, screen shattering like glass under pressure. Miguel's heart pounded. His mind raced. He didn't fight back. He couldn't. Every lesson his parents had ever taught him about dealing with police echoed in his head. Stay calm, don't move suddenly, be respectful, don't raise your voice. But none of it was working. Barker's face was red with rage. "You want to test me?" he snarled, shoving Miguel again, louder now, performing for the growing crowd. "Let me show you what happens when you mouth off to the law." A bystander live-streamed the whole thing. The video would go viral before the end of the day, but in that moment, Miguel wasn't thinking about virality. He was thinking about survival. Meanwhile, across town, Miguel's parents were preparing lunch, unaware that their son was trending online. His mother, Rosa, had just set the table when her phone rang. It was Mia, crying, panicked. "Mama, the police, they grabbed Miguel." Rosa dropped the spoon in her hand. "What? What do you mean?" she gasped. Mia couldn't speak clearly. All Rosa heard was "cop," yelling, "everyone's watching." Rosa dropped the phone and grabbed her keys. By the time she and her husband arrived, Miguel was already in a holding cell, detained. No charges filed, no crime committed, just a smile that had set a man off. And the videos, spreading like wildfire, millions of views, dozens of angles, comments pouring in. This is what racism looks like. He was just a kid. Fire that cop. But the department was silent. Rosa stood outside the precinct, holding a photo of Miguel from his last birthday, his smile still bright, his eyes hopeful. She wasn't going to be silent, not anymore. And neither was the crowd that gathered outside over the next few days. They brought signs, chanted his name, demanded answers. News outlets swarmed the family. Miguel didn't want fame, he wanted peace. But now the choice wasn't his. As the protests grew and politicians took sides, Barker was placed on administrative leave. But the damage was already done. Miguel was left traumatized. Nightmares haunted him. Crowds made him flinch. His smile gone. But this story wasn't over, because what began as one boy's humiliation would soon become the spark for a movement that would shake the city and change lives forever. The rain hit the streets like a whispering fury that night, drenching the sidewalks outside City Hall where hundreds of people stood under umbrellas and handmade cardboard signs. The air buzzed with chants, flashing cameras, and rising tension. Miguel stood beside his mother, shivering not from the cold but from the weight of so many eyes. He hadn't spoken publicly yet. Rosa, his mother, had insisted he didn't need to, but something inside him shifted watching the crowd, watching how many people had gathered just for him. His silence, like his stolen smile, was beginning to feel like something that had been taken, and now he wanted it back. As the mayor arrived under a canopy of security, the crowd grew louder. "Justice for Miguel!" echoed through the plaza. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every quiet teenager who had been punished for existing, every immigrant family who had taught their kids to be invisible just to survive. The people saw themselves in him, and Miguel, still terrified, still healing, was beginning to see himself differently too. 2 weeks had passed since the incident. Officer Barker's face had been splashed across news networks and social media feeds like a warning sign. The department had finally made a statement, one filled with vague acknowledgments and legal hedging. But people weren't satisfied. The community demanded more than suspension. They wanted accountability, and Rosa wanted answers. She filed a civil rights lawsuit, backed by a coalition of lawyers, including one who had grown up just blocks from where Miguel was detained. His name was Malcolm Grant, a sharp, relentless voice who had once been profiled himself as a teen. He took Miguel's case pro bono. "This isn't just one incident," he told the press. "This is a system that trained a man to see a smile as a threat." Meanwhile, the police union rallied behind Barker, claiming his safety was at risk, despite video evidence to the contrary. They painted Miguel as disrespectful, attempting to flip the narrative, but the internet wasn't buying it. New footage emerged showing Barker involved in other questionable stops. Whispers became patterns, patterns became proof. Rosa spent every day balancing lawyer meetings, media interviews, and comforting Miguel, who barely slept. She sat by his bed at night, holding his hand like when he was a child, humming the old lullabies from home. Miguel didn't cry. He held it all in. But sometimes when he thought no one could hear, she'd catch the soft tremble in his breath. The fear hadn't left him. It lived in the corner of every room he entered. Mia, his sister, had started drawing again, pictures of her family in bright-colored pencil. But every drawing of Miguel had one thing in common: no smile. Just a neutral line for lips. Like even in her imagination, she couldn't remember how it looked. School had become impossible. Miguel couldn't concentrate. The stares, the whispers, some of his classmates supported him, but others mocked the attention. "Oh, look, it's Mr. Viral," someone sneered as he walked to his locker. One girl asked him if he'd faked the whole thing for views. Miguel just kept walking, but his shoulders hunched lower every day. Malcolm Grant knew the timeline was critical. He filed formal motions demanding Barker's arrest and review of every stop he'd made in the past 5 years. They uncovered multiple complaints, all quietly buried. One from a Latino father stopped with his son outside a grocery store. Another from a black nurse on her way to work. None had gone viral. None had led to action. Until now. That's when national media got involved. Miguel and Rosa were invited to speak on a primetime news special hosted by a prominent anchor known for covering racial injustice. At first, Miguel declined, but his mother reminded him, "You can speak for the ones who couldn't." Hands, Miguel agreed. The interview aired on a Thursday night, and within minutes, the internet lit up. Miguel's quiet, sincere recounting of that day, his voice cracking as he described how Barker screamed at him for smiling, cut through the noise like a blade. Viewers across the country saw what the people in Atlanta already knew. Miguel was not just a victim, he was a symbol. A reminder that something ugly had always been there beneath the surface, waiting for a moment to erupt. Support poured in. Celebrities tweeted their outrage. Civil rights leaders reached out. Students at schools across the country held smile-ins where they wore shirts that said, "Smiling is not a crime." But not everyone celebrated. Barker's supporters, radical fringe voices, and online trolls lashed out. Miguel received hate mail, anonymous messages, threats. Rosa reported them all, but the tension was constant. Still, they did not hide. They stayed visible. And Miguel? Slowly. He started smiling again, carefully, quietly, and then with more confidence. But the war was far from over. By the third week, the air outside the courthouse crackled with tension. Protesters lined the sidewalks, holding up signs that read, "Protect our youth," "Justice for Miguel," and "Accountability now." The marble steps leading up to the courtroom had become a platform for voices long silenced, community leaders, civil rights activists, and parents who had seen their children face similar trauma. Inside, Miguel sat quietly in a pressed suit, his hands folded in his lap, heart hammering against his chest like it was trying to escape. Malcolm Grant, his attorney, sat beside him, calm as stone. Across the aisle, Officer Barker leaned back in his chair, his face drawn but defiant. The courtroom was packed. Local reporters filled the benches while national media waited outside for any update. This hearing wasn't just about Miguel anymore. It was about every family who had endured quiet injustice in the shadows, and it was about a system that had allowed Barker to stay in uniform for far too long. The judge reviewed the video footage first. Every person in that courtroom watched the grainy airport security cam as Barker stormed toward Miguel, finger jabbing, voice raised. Miguel, smiling at something on his phone, startled, then froze like prey before a predator. Rosa reached for her son's hand as they replayed it. You could hear a gasp ripple through the gallery when Barker shoved Miguel's phone, sending it skittering across the tile. When the footage cut to the crowd gathering, to Barker grabbing Miguel's shoulder, the tension in the room was so thick it choked. The prosecutor presented evidence of a pattern. 4 other young men of color stopped without cause by Barker over the last year. 2 of them testified that day. 1 was only 16. His voice cracked as he spoke of being accused of shoplifting when he hadn't even entered the store yet. The judge listened, expression unreadable, while Barker's lawyer objected, deflected, tried to cast doubt. But the tide had turned. This wasn't just testimony. It was truth long buried. Outside, a mural had begun to take shape on a nearby wall. A local artist, commissioned by activists, painted Miguel's face, eyes determined, a single tear rolling down. Above him were the words, "A smile is not a threat." People came in waves to watch the painting grow each day. It became a rallying point, a place where strangers hugged, cried, and promised change. Rosa visited it every evening, often leaving a white flower beneath it. One night, Miguel came too. He stared at it for a long time before whispering, "That's not the boy I used to be." His mother took his hand gently. "No, mijo," she said. "You've become more." The trial stretched for weeks. Barker's defense grew weaker as more evidence mounted. A former partner of Barker's took the stand reluctantly. His voice shook as he admitted he had seen Barker act with bias before but feared speaking out. "I didn't want to lose my job," he confessed. That testimony struck a nerve. People saw the rot wasn't just in one officer, it was in a system built on silence and fear. Miguel, now more composed, testified last. His words were quiet but powerful. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just smiling," he said, and somehow that made me dangerous in his eyes. When asked what he wanted, Miguel paused. "I want people like me to feel safe in their skin, and I want people like him to be held accountable when they make us feel like criminals just for existing." The courtroom was silent when he finished. Even the judge looked shaken. The morning of the verdict, the city felt like it was holding its breath. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had tripled. News vans lined the streets. Helicopters buzzed faintly overhead. Students skipped school, office workers took long lunches, and entire families came to stand shoulder to shoulder, waiting. Rosa held Miguel's hand as they approached the building. His face was calm but unreadable, older now, more distant. Each step echoed with the weight of a year's worth of trauma, rage, growth, and hope. Inside, the judge took his seat and adjusted his glasses. The room fell silent. After reviewing all evidence, witness testimony, and recorded materials, he began, "This court finds Officer Daniel Barker guilty of abuse of power, racial discrimination, and unlawful detainment." A loud gasp broke out, followed by quiet sobs. Miguel sat frozen, lips slightly parted. The judge continued, issuing a sentence that included Barker's immediate termination, a 5-year bar from any law enforcement employment, and mandatory community service with civil rights organizations. But what struck everyone most was the judge's final statement. "Let this be known, not just as a ruling, but as a reckoning. Smiles should not be punished, presence should not be criminalized, and no child, no matter their color, should have to shrink in the face of authority that is meant to protect." The crowd outside erupted into cheers as news spread. Reporters scrambled to go live. The mural near the courthouse was surrounded by hundreds of people holding up candles and flowers. Miguel walked through the crowd quietly, unnoticed at first. But someone pointed, and then another. And soon applause erupted, not the kind reserved for celebrities, but the kind that recognized something deeper, courage in the face of cruelty. Life after the trial changed, not immediately and not without complication. Miguel became a symbol, a headline, a name etched into a movement. But he was still a teenager, and fame came with a different kind of pressure. He was invited to speak at rallies, appear on talk shows, and even received offers for book deals. His inbox flooded with messages, some grateful, some hateful. Rosa helped him navigate it all, reminding him gently that he didn't owe the world his pain every day. At one rally in Washington, D.C., Miguel stood before a crowd of tens of thousands. The Lincoln Memorial loomed behind him, and his voice echoed over the reflecting pool. "I never asked to become a symbol," he said. "I just wanted to be a kid. But if being a symbol means helping another kid never go through what I did, then I'll keep standing here." He started a scholarship fund for students of color pursuing law and justice careers. He returned to school, this time attending early college courses in social science and civil rights history. But he still had nightmares, echoes of Barker's voice, of flashing lights, of being pinned down. Rosa would find him some nights sitting by the window, staring out quietly. "You're safe," she'd whisper, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "You're home." Meanwhile, Officer Barker struggled with his own fall from grace. A man who once commanded fear now faced isolation. His former precinct distanced themselves, and former colleagues refused to return calls. Interviews requesting his side of the story were declined or ignored. In rare leaked footage from an altercation at a bar, Barker lashed out at someone, calling him a bully with a badge. He was escorted out, drunk and shouting that he only did what was necessary. It became clear that even he hadn't come to terms with what he'd done, but the story didn't end there. Months later, a federal civil rights investigation was opened into the police department's practices, sparked in part by Miguel's case. Whistleblowers emerged. Hidden patterns came to light. More officers were quietly let go, and new reforms were introduced. Miguel, now barely 18, had unwittingly helped ignite a systemic shift. One evening, as Miguel stood outside the mural, now completed with brilliant color and surrounded by a garden planted by volunteers, he saw a group of younger kids standing there, one pointing at the painting. "That's the guy who changed everything," the boy whispered. Miguel smiled, walked over, and crouched beside them. "Hey," he said, "you know what really changes everything?" The kids looked up at him wide-eyed. He pointed to the space between them. "Moments like this, when we talk, when we listen, when we see each other." The summer after the trial, invitations began pouring in from cities across the United States. Civil rights organizations, universities, and youth leadership programs all wanted Miguel to speak. At first, Rosa was hesitant. "You're still healing," she said. "This spotlight isn't easy." But Miguel felt something stirring in him, a quiet urgency that refused to sit still. He had seen how much his story had awakened others. Maybe it wasn't just about what had happened to him, but what he could help others find in themselves. His first trip was to Chicago, where he visited a high school known for having one of the highest rates of student-police confrontations in the state. He walked into the auditorium expecting a small group. Instead, it was packed. Students sat on the floor, stood in the aisles. Teachers stood in the back, arms crossed, eyes cautious. Miguel walked to the microphone and paused. "I'm not here to talk at you," he said. "I'm here to talk with you." That one line broke the tension. Hands started rising. Questions flowed. Not just about his case, but about fear, identity, and the feeling of being seen as a threat just for existing. In the following months, Miguel traveled to Detroit, Atlanta, Oakland, and Dallas. At each stop, he listened more than he spoke. He learned that his story was just one branch in a forest of untold stories. He met kids who had been stopped for walking home from tutoring, girls suspended for defending themselves against harassment, and undocumented teens living in fear of both ICE and local police. The weight of it all started to take a toll. One night, in a hotel room overlooking the Atlanta skyline, Miguel broke down. He called Rosa. "Am I doing any good?" he asked. "Or am I just making people relive pain?" Rosa stayed silent for a long time before answering. "You're not reopening wounds," she said softly. "You're proving they're not alone." That night, he wrote in his journal for hours. He started to reframe his journey, not as a fight, but as a shared witnessing. But not everyone welcomed him. At one stop in Texas, a group of counter-protesters gathered outside his event, holding signs that read, "Stop playing the race card" and "Police lives matter." One man followed him to his car, shouting, "You're poisoning these kids' minds." Miguel stared at him for a moment, then calmly said, "Maybe it's time we all listen to each other." The man scoffed and walked away, but not before glancing back once, unsure of his own footing. In Washington, D.C., Miguel was invited to a private roundtable discussion with lawmakers. It was supposed to be a symbolic gesture, but when he walked in, he realized just how important his voice had become. Across from him sat senators, representatives, and policy experts. One asked, "If you could change one thing, what would it be?" Miguel didn't hesitate. "Make every department accountable, not just by reports, but by people, community boards, civilian review. Put the badge back in the hands of the public." Later that night, he met with activists in a quiet diner. They talked strategy, sustainability, and safety. "Burnout is real," one woman warned. "Don't let the movement consume the kid inside you." That line hit him hard. He thought of the friends he hadn't seen in months, the video games collecting dust, the beach days missed. He missed being just Miguel. When he returned home briefly that winter, the mural had been extended. A second wall now showed not just Miguel, but a collage of other faces, students, community leaders, neighbors, all who had spoken up, stood up, or lifted others in the wake of injustice. He stood there silently, tears forming in his eyes. The fight was bigger than him, but so was the healing. It was a cold, gray February afternoon when Miguel received the email. The subject line read, "Confidential, White House Youth Advisory Council invitation." He read it 3 times before it sank in. The president's office wanted him to be one of 10 youth leaders advising on national policy regarding law enforcement reform, racial equity, and civil rights education. It was surreal, like stepping through a door that was never meant for someone like him. He forwarded it to Rosa immediately, his fingers trembling. She called within seconds. "Miguel," she said, almost whispering, "do you realize what this means?" But not everyone was as excited. "Careful," warned Jordan, a grassroots organizer he'd grown close to during his travels. "They want your image, not your voice. Be sure you're walking in as a partner, not a prop." Miguel knew Jordan had a point. The government loved optics, diversity panels, photo ops, carefully worded initiatives with little action behind them. Still, a small voice inside Miguel whispered, "If I don't go, who will speak for us in that room?" He accepted the invitation. When he arrived in Washington, D.C., he was greeted with polished smiles and perfectly worded briefings. The White House was a world apart from